I'm Emma Taylor. I'm 34 years old, and I haven't been home in over a decade. Tonight, I pulled into the long gravel driveway of my family's ranch house in West Texas, the same one I left when I was 17. The lights were glowing from every window, and I could see the Christmas tree through the front room like nothing had changed. Garland wrapped around the staircase. The scent of roasted turkey drifted out to the porch, and soft jazz played behind the laughter inside. But as I stood at the door holding a bottle of wine, my hand hesitated on the doorknob. It's strange, really, how a place can look exactly the same and yet feel completely unfamiliar. The wreath on the door, the same one my mom hangs every year, felt like it belonged to someone else's family. And the warmth inside didn't quite reach me. Not yet. They were all there. My parents, my older brother Mark, a few aunts and cousins I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. They hugged me like I was a long-lost friend, but it felt more like a courtesy than a welcome. I smiled. I said I was glad to be home, but truthfully, I wasn't sure what I was doing back. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times. I thought I'd feel proud, or angry, maybe even sad, but mostly, I just felt like a guest in my own story. I grew up in a house where legacy was everything. My dad ran Taylor Agritech, a company that had been in our family for 3 generations. He didn't just expect us to carry the name, he expected us to carry the weight that came with it. My brother Mark was the golden boy. He wore his first tie before he turned 8 and started sitting in on board meetings in high school. Meanwhile, I was always the one setting the table, told to help your mother, while the men talked business behind closed doors. It wasn't that anyone said I couldn't dream, they just made sure I understood which dreams weren't welcome. When I told my dad I wanted to work in aerospace, his response was so casual it cut deeper than anger ever could. He said, "That's not the life for a girl like you." I remember standing in the doorway of his office, my application to Caltech in hand, my chest tight with hope. He didn't even look up from his laptop, just waved me off like I'd asked if I could skip school for a field trip. That night, I packed a duffel bag. I had $214 saved from babysitting and tutoring math. I took the bus out of Midland at 2 a.m., with a pillow under my arm and a folder of college brochures tucked between my knees. No one stopped me. My mom didn't call out. My dad didn't chase the bus. Mark didn't even notice I was gone until spring break. I left quietly, and the silence stayed with me longer than I expected. I worked 2 jobs to get through college, slept on couches, ate a lot of cereal, but I made it. I got into the aerospace program at Georgia Tech. I built satellites. I joined a NASA fellowship, and every step I took, I carried that empty seat at the dinner table with me. I don't think I stayed away out of spite. At least, not after the first couple of years. It was more about survival. I didn't want to come home just to shrink myself again. Every time I passed through Texas for work, I'd think about calling. I even saved a draft once. "Hi, it's Emma. I'll be nearby if you want to grab coffee." I never sent it. So when I say I haven't been home in years, it's not because I forgot where the door was. I just didn't think there was a place for me behind it anymore. Until now. College didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like a test I wasn't supposed to pass. My first week at Georgia Tech, I was the only woman in 3 of my core engineering classes. Most of the guys didn't even hide their doubt. One asked if I was in the wrong room. Another said, I must be the TA's girlfriend. I laughed it off, but inside, I was swallowing a mix of anger and fear that sat heavy in my chest. The professors weren't much better. One never called on me, even when my hand was the only one raised. Another returned my lab report with a comment that read, "Surprisingly thorough. I learned early on to work twice as hard just to be considered average." I spent most nights in the campus lab, hunched over CAD software and circuit boards, trying to make sense of equations that felt designed to weed people out. I'd bring a thermos of coffee and stay until the janitor turned the lights off. It wasn't glamorous. I was tired all the time. Some nights, I'd cry in the stairwell between the physics building and the dorms. I never let anyone I'd wipe my face, take a deep breath, and keep going, because quitting would have meant they were right about me. One semester, I built a prototype for a microsatellite as part of a group project. My teammates didn't take me seriously at first. They gave me the easy task of materials procurement. I ended up redesigning the payload configuration and caught a flaw in the thermal shield analysis that saved the project. After the presentation, the professor pulled me aside. He said, "You've got a good eye. Have you ever thought about staying on for research?" It was the first time someone in authority spoke to me like I belonged. That moment changed everything. Not overnight, but enough to shift something inside me. I stopped apologizing when I got answers right in class. I stopped shrinking in my seat during reviews. But the work didn't get easier. If anything, it got heavier. Deadlines were brutal. The equipment failed all the time, and the boys' club never really disappeared. They just learned to mask it behind fake compliments or patronizing advice. I carried a quiet fire, though. I wrote my goals in dry erase marker on my dorm mirror. NASA internship, satellite design fellowship, lead engineer by 28. Every time I felt like giving up, I looked at that mirror. I didn't have family cheering me on. No care packages. No one was waiting at home to hear how midterms went. But I had grit. I had this vision of a woman who built rockets, not because she was told she could, but because she refused to accept that she couldn't. And that kept me moving. One exam, one sleepless night. One soldered wire at a time. My breakthrough came 2 years after graduation. I got a call from Helios Dynamics, a private aerospace firm contracted by NASA for deep space communication systems. They were building a relay satellite for the Artemis program and needed a systems engineer who wasn't afraid of complexity or pressure. I said yes before the recruiter finished the sentence. My first day, I walked into a room full of senior engineers, most twice my age, and all men. I kept my head down, listened more than I spoke, and let my work speak louder than anything I could have said. Within months, I was leading sub-team meetings and presenting design changes to the project director. I redesigned a signal shielding array that reduced heat loss by 17%. That alone saved the company 6 figures and got us back on schedule after a major delay. One afternoon, a journalist from Wired showed up at the lab. They were doing a feature on women who launch. I wasn't supposed to be in the article, but after hearing about my shield redesign, they asked for a quote. That quote turned into a sidebar, then a photo, then, a few weeks later, a cover story. Suddenly, people knew my name. I started getting LinkedIn messages from girls in high school asking how I got into aerospace. My inbox was filled with speaking invites from conferences I never thought I'd be allowed to attend, let alone headline. There was a ceremony at the Kennedy Space Center when our satellite launched. I stood beside the rocket, helmet under my arm, suit dusty from the Florida wind. They called my name over the PA, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a placeholder. I felt real, seen, solid. But in the crowd of hundreds, there were no familiar faces. No one from home sent a message. Not even a "saw you on the news" text from my dad. I posted the launch photo on social media anyway. It got thousands of likes, even a repost from NASA's official account. From my family, silence. That silence hit different this time. Not because I needed their praise, but because I finally understood I'd stopped hoping for it. Somewhere along the way, I let go of the version of me that waited for my father to clap. I became someone who clapped for herself. Still, the holidays stirred something I couldn't ignore. I started dreaming about home again. The ranch. My mom's cornbread stuffing. The sound of boots on hardwood floors. The longing wasn't for validation. It was for peace. Closure. So when my mentor, Richard Davis, suggested I take a real break and go see my family, I hesitated. Then I said yes. Maybe not to reconnect, but to show up on my own terms. To sit at the table not as a daughter trying to prove herself, but as a woman who already had. Dinner started like every other Christmas I remembered. The table was dressed with white linen and lit with soft candles. Plates of glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, and green beans filled the center. And glasses clinked lightly with toasts that didn't mean much. My mom sat at one end, carefully slicing cornbread and passing it down. My dad sat at the head, where he always had, carving the ham with slow, deliberate strokes. The conversation floated around work, kids, the drought, and which neighbor bought a new truck. Nobody asked me anything. I smiled, offered polite nods, and passed the gravy boat without drawing attention. I felt like a visiting relative, not a daughter. Every time someone said, "Remember that one Christmas?" I listened. Even though I was there for those moments too. The air shifted when my dad cleared his throat. He stood up, glass in hand, and tapped his knife against it. The clinking sound cut through the room. Everyone fell quiet. Forks paused midair. He started with a joke about tradition, how family meant legacy, and how proud he was of the path we'd built. Then he looked at Mark and said, "Starting this year, I'm officially naming him the sole successor to Taylor Agritech and our family estate." There was a beat of silence. Someone muttered, "Well deserved." My dad kept going. "This wasn't easy," he said, turning toward me. "But Emma chose a different life, one that doesn't align with the values this family built. So, the inheritance, including all financial and property assets, will be passed to Mark. Entirely. No apology, no soft cushion to land on. Just the sentence, clean and surgical." My heart didn't sink. It just went still. I didn't say anything. I kept my eyes on the cranberry sauce, like it might offer me a way out. My fingers dug into the edge of my chair to keep me grounded. My cheeks burned, but I held my face neutral. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Across the table, Mark shifted uncomfortably. My mom's eyes stayed locked on her plate. Not a word from her. Not even a glance in my direction. The room was quiet in the way a room gets when no one wants to be the one to break it. I finally picked up my fork, took a bite of potatoes, but I couldn't taste them. Swallowed with effort. Looked around the table like I was seeing it for the first time. The walls felt closer. My chair was suddenly too small. My cousin made an awkward comment about Mark deserving it. My uncle laughed a little too loudly. I sat there, stone still. Rage curled up beneath my ribs. Not screaming, but pulsing quietly. What hurt most wasn't the money. It wasn't the estate. It was being dismissed, like I was never part of the blueprint to begin with. Like all I'd done, every launch, every article, every late night spent soldering circuits was invisible in this room. I caught my reflection in the window across from me. Candlelight flickered against the glass, and I saw a woman who didn't belong to this story anymore. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she'd outgrown it. Still, I sat through dessert, said thank you when my mom passed me a slice of pie, pretended not to notice that she didn't look me in the eye. The silence was louder than any speech he could have made. It said, "You chose wrong. You don't belong here." And I was starting to believe it, until something happened that none of us saw coming. Just as someone reached for a second slice of pie, my mentor Richard cleared his throat and pulled out his phone. He'd been quiet all evening, tucked into the far end of the table like a polite outsider. But now, he stood slowly and held up the screen for everyone to see. A live news segment was playing. The room went quiet again, forks midair for the second time. On the screen was the Kennedy Space Center, floodlit and filled with reporters. My name appeared in bold letters beneath the anchor's face. "Tonight, NASA announces the Stellar Medal of Innovation goes to Dr. Emma Taylor," the anchor said, "for her groundbreaking work on thermal shielding in long-range communication satellites." Someone at the table gasped. My cousin dropped her spoon. My mom turned toward the screen like she wasn't sure if she heard right. And my father just stared. He didn't say a word, didn't blink. His wine glass stayed halfway lifted, frozen in time. He looked at the screen, then at me. His face was pale, jaw tight. I didn't move. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, back straight, breathing slowly. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just held his gaze. Mark shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable under the weight of his newly announced inheritance. My mom glanced between us and blinked hard, like she was waking from something. Richard lowered the phone and looked right at my dad. "Figured you might want to know," he said. The room stayed quiet, the air thick. It wasn't chaos. It was a surrender. Everyone was recalibrating what they thought they knew about me. The balance of power had shifted. But not because I'd forced it. I hadn't raised my voice or demanded to be seen. I simply let the truth speak for itself. My father finally set down his glass. His knuckles were white. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could tell he wanted to say something. Maybe a question? Maybe a defense? But there was nothing he could offer that would have landed right. In that moment, I felt taller than I ever had at that table. I wasn't the runaway teenager or the odd one out. I was the woman who had done everything they thought she couldn't. And now, the world had taken notice. I didn't need them to clap. I didn't need their pride. But for the first time, they had to sit in the discomfort of being wrong about me. My mom whispered, "Emma," and reached for my hand. I let her touch it. Briefly, gently, but I didn't squeeze back. Across the table, Mark avoided my eyes completely. He suddenly looked very small. Not because I had taken anything from him, but because he saw the difference between what he was given and what I earned. Richard gave me the smallest nod. No words, just respect, the kind I had fought for in labs, late nights, and lonely cities. And now, without saying a word, I had it in a room that once refused to see me. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. "I just did my job," I said quietly. And then, I passed the pie. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, my dad knocked softly on the door of the guest room. He didn't come in right away, just stood in the hallway, as if waiting for permission to cross a line he had drawn himself. When he finally stepped in, he looked smaller than I remembered. He sat on the edge of the armchair near the window, hands folded tight. "I didn't see it before," he said. "I didn't see you." There was no defense in his voice, no lecture, just an old man looking at his daughter, trying to understand the gap between them. I let the silence sit for a while before I answered. "I never needed your money," I said. "I just wanted you to believe I was worth something before the world said it for you." He nodded, not trying to argue. For once, he listened. He told me he was proud. That he had been watching, even if he didn't know how to say it. Maybe he was wrong about what legacy really means. I didn't forgive everything in that moment, but something inside me loosened. I saw the man, not just the father, and I realized I wasn't holding on to anger anymore, just a kind of gentle grief for what could have been. The next morning, as we cleaned up wrapping paper and ribbon, my niece Lily climbed onto the couch beside me. She looked up and asked, "Aunt Emma, do girls get to build rockets too?" I smiled and brushed her hair behind her ear. "Yeah," I said, "they do, and they get to lead the launch." She grinned, already imagining herself in a helmet. That was the legacy I cared about. Not land, not assets, just that spark in her eyes. That spark is why I wanted to share this with you. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Sharing this story wasn't easy, but maybe someone out there needed to hear it. Maybe you felt unseen, or like your worth depended on someone else's approval. If that's you, I hope you know now that you're not alone. Your path doesn't have to look like anyone else's to be worth walking. And your voice, your value, they're real, even when the people closest to you can't see it yet. I'd love to hear your story. If you've ever had to prove yourself or felt misunderstood by family, leave a comment below. And if you want more stories that speak to the quiet battles we all fight, hit subscribe and stick around. There's more to come.